to the song of ringing steel.
Welcome back to the Mentor Roulette grind. This time, the Wheel of Jobs says that we play Warrior on the Monday evening in the first weekly lockout of 7.1. And this time, we get an incredible amount of variety and duties. Some trials, some raids, some extremes, and some dungeons. Speaking of which, for duty 1, we went to Ifrit. Normal. I guess someone else hit the boss first, hence why he went to the center before facing me. But hey, let's not complain about a free gift. Placing Ifrit right in the center makes it easier for everyone to see and immediately switch to the nail, and also allows me to strike the nail without facing Ifrit towards it. The machinist could probably even have been using spread shot to double down on damage, but hey, it isn't really necessary. Quick and easy. For duty 2, we went to Ihuykatumu, with a solid group too. The first boss, the Manatee, has an interesting detail that this vacuum mechanic which sucks up terrain actually removes the terrain on the opposite end of the arena, and by the second time the mechanic happens, the other side is clean and the boss will not use this mechanic again, for better or worse. When I was soloing this fight a while back, the interesting thing is that by removing this mechanic from the repertoire, it became more dangerous for a lone tank to fight, as it meant the boss spent more time attacking with unavoidable damage. Also, I don't know why I didn't really notice it sooner, but there is something really funny about the final boss having a tank buster simply called Blade. Aside from this, the duty went extremely smoothly, so not very much to talk about. A general tip for Warrior is that Inner Chaos, Chaotic Cyclone, Primal Rend and Primal Ruination, that each innately are guaranteed to crit, also has an interaction with Bloodwetting and Nascent Flash, making the healing from them also guaranteed to crit, in case you need the extra healing. For duty 3, we are going to the new dungeon from 7.1, so timestamp if you don't want to see it yet. With that said, I was a 12-minute replacement in Yuweyawata station, and I fade in to see that it is just 2 DPS, no healer, so I inquire about what in the world happened. According to both of them, apparently the tank was a total drama queen and refused to put on their tank stance, and blamed the DPS for not being able to control their damage when they inevitably overtook the tank in enmity as a result of, you know, the aforementioned lack of a tank stance. I'm impressed these guys put up with that behavior for 2 whole bosses. Somehow, the tank got vote kicked, and the moment it happened, the healer bounced as well, as they were apparently a duo. This is, of course, just what I was told, but if this is true, I can hardly comprehend how that tank gets by on the daily. Regardless of all that nonsense, I'm pretty confident as a warrior, so I suggest we start carefully clearing anyway. I use the word carefully, but I did still do full wall-to-wall pulls without issue. Tanks are very balanced. And just as we finish up the second pull and ready to fight the boss, and I'm about to bring up the missing healer, we get one. And the boss, which is the final one of course, is Protocarby, a giant bunny monster. An interesting thing about this boss is that it has a lot of lingering attacks in some ways. The Raging Claw at the start is basically lifted straight out of the savage Protocarby fight, although Protocarby also has a backswing at the end. And the explosions during Leprine Loaf are very reminiscent of Ruby Weapon. The big finish of Crater Carve seems to catch a lot of players by surprise, because it could both look like a circle followed by a donut, but it is just a circle that deletes most of the arena. Yes, deletes. And this is where I discovered that all 3 are first-timers. Sucks for the healer that missed most of the dungeon. Maybe they'd run it again just to see it. The moment the last of them go down, I ask if they are first-timers, and because they are, I don't even bother asking if I should try to solo the rest. I just jump down so we can go again. The run back goes a lot better. Once this last phase starts, the fight is relatively simple. It is pretty clear the boss plays with specifically the concept of a fight fought on a slim circular space. Spread markers, stack markers, tank busters, a sequence of circle AoEs that traces the ring of the arena. Raging Claw to force you to hurry over behind the boss. It plays a lot with mechanics that would be more problematic in specifically this kind of shape of arena. I hope we get more of this kind of stuff with weirdly shaped arenas. That said, we finish up nicely. For duty 4, we went to Copperbell Mines with what appears to be 2 first-timers and a returning player. Overall, the duty went just fine. However, there was something with the white mage. First, they were strangely equipped appropriately to match Copperbell mines, despite being a white mage, meaning they were at least past Ifrit normal in the main quest. However, based on their gear, and the fact they're a returning player, I would still gauge them as a very, very new to the role player. The main mistake they were making was being extremely excessive with cure casts, especially during AoE pulls. However, their duty still went decently fast and things were fine, so I'm sure they'll get more confidence with more practice. For duty 5, we go to Garuda Extreme. As we enter, Gondo, the other tank, asks who is main tanking, as I ask if we need to go over tactics or just go for it. I also let Gondo know they can choose who's main tanking, and as I assume they probably want to main tank, I ask which of the ads I need to take away, while simultaneously looking it up. I was told the one that starts with C, and indeed, Shirada it is. With tank placement in order, we go for it. The important highlights of this fight is as follows. The first time Garuda poofs away from the arena, when she comes back, her Mistral Song will do a large amount of damage if you're not hiding behind the rocks for it. All other mechanics she will use throughout the fight will not care whether you're behind the rocks or not, even if it is commonly seen that players will hide just the same. Her various attacks can hurt the rocks if they get cleaved, which matters because the aerial blast's damage is reduced by the amount of rocks on the field. The two ads that spawn, Shirada and Sopana, makes Garuda invulnerable as long as they are on the field, and they also make each other take less damage the closer they are to each other. At certain intervals, Sopana and Garuda will swap places, which is the reason why the off-tank has to grab specifically Shirada and run to Narnia. Then we simply kill off one ad, then the other, and go back on Garuda. At certain points in the fight, Razor Plumes will spawn alongside a Spiny Plume. When the Spiny Plume is killed, it explodes into a wind barrier that reduces the damage of Aerial Blast, which is meant to be the way you survive it, should Garuda do it more than once. However, it takes so long before she will do the Aerial Blast you need the Spiny Plume for that the vast majority of groups will have defeated her before that. Furthermore, Tank Limit Break can be used in place of the wind barrier should it turn out to be necessary. As such, it is way easier to simply kill off this Spiny Plume. Besides, the plume builds a stacking debuff on whoever tanks it, and if it reaches a certain point, 3 stacks, the player explodes, so keeping it alive for an extended period requires tank switching, and let's not forget the Spiny Plume is extremely frail too. With that said, as a result of the group being reasonably prepared, we quickly clean up the fight. For duty 6, I'm an instant replacement in Leviathan Hard. I was a bit surprised by this, as I was expecting Extreme if someone left. I guess this duty is one of those where you can end up wiping a bunch if people just don't get it, but is it that bad? Anyway, with the Dark Knight as my co-tank, they really appreciate being able to tank the head, as the tail reflects magic damage, such as Edge of Darkness, so it makes perfect sense for me to take the tail. One of our healers is also ready on the Elemental Converter in time, so overall, the fight goes perfectly smoothly. One thing I did to try and optimize was aggressively trying to grab all of the Sahagin ads and use Vengeance, as Vengeance retaliates for some damage. This would kill them ever so slightly faster. For duty 7, we went to Porta Decumana. Warrior is still a bit awkward in this level range, but has a few ways to optimize their damage a bit. The optimal Berserk window is Storm's Path, or Eye, and 2 Inner Beasts, which can be attained in a few ways, but is often awkward since you both need to be in a specific spot in your combo sequence and have a specific amount of Beast Gauge and Infuriates. The second best option is 3 Inner Beasts, which is also uncommon. The third best option is Maim, Storm's Path, or Eye, and Inner Beast. Personally, I have a tendency to just enforce the Storm's Path and Inner Beasts, as delaying Berserk 1, maybe 2 GSDs isn't that big of a deal in Porta Decumana, as long as you don't lose out on a Berserk cast. The second way you can optimize Warrior in this fight is whenever the boss has a longer sequence of auto attacks, to use Vengeance, again, as it can allow you to swing back for some free extra damage. Or does that actually work when it's magic auto attacks? I think it's magic auto attacks? Aside from this, it probably doesn't surprise you that not much happened here. For the tradition, I've actually gotten a lot of feedback from all of you on if Warrior was a Pokemon, and I do agree that Warrior probably works really well as either a rock or a ground type. It could even be a fire type with its fiery volcanic explosions and whatnot. My ideas for a Warrior Pokemon would either be rock and fighting type with moves like Bulk Up and Drain Punch, or a ground and fire type, perhaps with a move that always critically hits, although based on how insanely busted Urshifu has been, I wonder if that would actually be a good idea. For duty 8, I was a 4-minute replacement on Ravana Extreme, and we're just 4 players. 2 tanks, a healer and a DPS, and the Reaper suggests we try with 4. Not only do I already know this is possible with just 3 players, but we might as well take a page out of Wolfheart's book, remember that guy, from Dancer vs Nidhogg Extreme? And build some echo by at least trying. On our first attempt, we ultimately wipe out during the butterfly phase as our only healer died to liberation, followed by the clones that spawn in after. But by the time we actually wipe, we're up to 6 players, and Ravana down to half HP. For the second attempt, let's take it play by play. The seeing something is a pretty painful mechanic for melees in general. 3 sides will have a barrier. If you attack Ravana from any of those sides, he will retaliate for heavy damage and also slow your attack speed. This also means the main tank can be unable to safely attack at all if one of the sides he blocks from is the front. Specifically, seeing Wing is very nice for the tank, but scary for everyone else because Ravana usually uses Tapasya right after this mechanic resolves, which is a cone aimed at the main tank. It is a single hit followed by 2 more hits, and if the tank steps away from Ravana for the time, the 2 follow-up swings can be dodged. After this, we get an additional machinist and Ravana starts on Prelude to Liberation, which is a large circle AoE, so just be away before it resolves. After that, several line AoEs appear and several players get targeted with large spread markers. My best advice here is that while it is possible to make sure only the spread marker targets get hit once each, as long as everyone only gets hit by 1 marker, it is survivable. After this, Ravana comes down again and performs Actual Liberation, which is a 270-degree frontal cone, so get behind him. Just like the first attempt, our healer still doesn't quite get it. Right after, 4 clones spawn that deal damage as they land, and again, as they dash across the arena, takes out our only healer. And now, this turns into a DPS race. Next, Ravana uses Warlord Shell, which is a type of DPS check. Warlord Shell is a barrier, and if it times out naturally, Ravana gets a damage buff and immediately strikes the party for massive damage. Usually, only tanks will survive it without barriers of their own. Then, he adds a Seeing Something on top, making it harder to strike him. He even switches the Seeing Something in the middle. After the mechanic is correctly resolved, Tapasya is used again, and the butterflies are called to the field. These must be killed. Each gunner that isn't killed in time makes the Bloody Fuller coming up later do more damage. While this happens, Ravana still uses Seeing Something and Tapasya as well as random raid wipes, which really drag me down. As I'm about to fade out, my co-tank takes over to save me, and then Bloody Fuller comes.
Rejoice in the glory of combat!
And because it is resolved correctly, it does very little damage. This final phase starts with a proximity AoE that is also a knockback, so we make sure to have something behind us. Afterwards, he targets me with a heavy stack marker. However, this is soloable by a tank, and probably also the best chance we have. After that, he uses Serpanaka 4 times on the main tank, so be sure to be behind Ravana for the rest of the raid. After this, he uses Swift Liberation, which is it's basically limit cut. He will dash to each number in succession, but he will dash through the player, and then dash from that point to the next. So once you've been dashed through, you need to step aside so you don't get hit twice. Otherwise, death. Afterwards, spread markers with a cross in the middle. We don't get to see Final Liberation, however. Good job by everyone, and very brave of everyone to be fine trying undersized just for the sake of it. For duty 9, we went to Keeper of the Lake. On the one hand, the healer clearly did use most of their toolkit, but in really strange ways. They mainly only used Holy super sparingly to stun with it, it seemed. They also were attacking sometimes on bosses. But they were also using Cure 1 quite frequently. My best way to explain this behavior is that they were terrified. They used Benediction on me when I dropped below like 60% HP. So I'm guessing they have no reference point for how much HP is safe or not, and so they want the tank to always be topped up on AoE pulls. See, the thing is, all of this would be a lot more okay if it wasn't for the simple fact they not only had level 90 crafted gear pieces, so they were level 90 at least, but even was working on a level 60 relic weapon, it seemed. Not entirely sure what all that is about, but it does suggest they've had quite a while with the job, right? Overall, the duty went fine despite that, but still concerning that the healer is that terrified of taking even the smallest chances with this much experience. For duty 10, we went to Burden of the Sun, Brute Justice. I let the other tank take the lead, but very early in the fight I reflexively provoke when it looks like they're about to die. They step away quite suddenly, but I was already trying to hand them back the lead once they had stabilized, leading to a rather awkward situation when I just wanted to help. For the rest of the fight, we correctly split up each pair of adds and the Gunbreaker gets Brute Justice as well. Really funny when I survived the Mega Blast from one of the adds with a sliver of HP. Quick and easy. I'm quite impressed with the great variety in this Warrior Mentor session, and even more impressed by the fact we pushed through 2 extremes that easily. It is both a plus and a minus that Warrior is this strong in dungeons sometimes. On the other hand, it makes it much easier for me to push through when things get tough. On the other hand, it also means I can paint over any mistakes other party members make quite easily at times. I wonder if we would have pushed through Ravana as easily had I been a different tank, or a different role even. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, before Shadowbringers, back when tanks had tank and damage stances, warriors could not access Beast Gauge if they weren't in a stance. And at level 50, your choice was tank stance or no stance. Weirdly, there was something to be said about whether it was better to have no stance on when not tanking, simply because the Beast Gauge axis didn't quite make up for the damage loss of being in a tank stance.